The leaky faucet in the kitchen sink was a metronome, counting down the final, agonizing seconds of their marriage. Drip. 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 Clara sat at the chipped formica dining table, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. The cramped, one-bedroom apartment smelled of stale cooking oil and the cheap floral air freshener she bought to mask the scent of the damp walls. Outside, the neon sign of the corner liquor store flickered, casting a sickly, intermittent red glow across her perfectly manicured hands. Those hands, soft and uncalloused, rested on top of a thick manila envelope. She looked entirely out of place in the dingy room. Clara was wearing a tailored crimson blouse and a sleek pencil skirt, clothes she had bought using the emergency credit card Arthur didn't know she had maxed out. Her hair was styled into flawless, glossy waves. She looked like a woman meant for penthouse suites and champagne, not peeling wallpaper and instant noodles. The sound of heavy, exhausted footsteps echoing down the hallway broke her trance. The doorknob rattled, sticking the way it always did, before the flimsy wooden door was pushed open. Arthur stepped inside. He looked exactly how he always looked at 8 p.m. on a Friday. He was wearing the hideous, neon orange and gray uniform of Swift Dash Deliveries. His baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes, his dark hair damp with sweat from riding a scooter through the sweltering city traffic for 10 hours. Smudges of exhaust and city grime stained his cheeks. He carried a plastic bag containing 2 boxes of discount takeout from the corner diner. "Hey," Arthur said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble of pure exhaustion. He kicked off his worn-out work boots and offered her a tired, but genuine, smile. Traffic was a nightmare on 5th Avenue. I managed to grab the sesame chicken from that place you like before they closed. He walked toward the kitchen counter, placing the plastic bag down, completely oblivious to the executioner's axe hanging over his head. Clara didn't move. She didn't look at the food. She just looked at him, at the cheap fabric of his uniform, the scuffs on his shoes, the absolute, unbearable mediocrity of the man she had married. A wave of disgust, cold and sharp, washed over her. "I'm not hungry, Arthur," Clara said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Arthur paused, his hand resting on the plastic bag. He turned around, sensing the sudden drop in temperature in the room. His sharp, dark eyes that always seemed too intense, too observant for a simple delivery driver, scanned her face, then dropped to the manila envelope on the table. "What's wrong?" he asked, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag. "Did the landlord call again? I told you, I'm taking an extra shift this weekend. The rent will be covered by Monday." "It's not about the rent, Arthur," Clara snapped, her composure cracking. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the cheap linoleum floor. "It's about everything. It's about this apartment. It's about that ridiculous uniform. It's about the fact that I am 26 years old, and my biggest accomplishment this week was finding a coupon for laundry detergent." Arthur's posture stiffened. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by a guarded, unreadable expression. "We talked about this, Clara. Things are tight right now, but it's temporary. I'm building something. I just need a little more time." "Time." Clara let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the thin walls. "I've given you 3 years. 3 years of playing the supportive, long-suffering wife to a man who refuses to be anything more than a glorified errand boy. I have watched my friends marry executives, buy summer homes, and travel to Europe, while I sit in this sweatbox waiting for you to bring home stale sesame chicken." She snatched the manila envelope off the table and threw it. It landed with a heavy smack on the counter right next to his hand. "I'm done waiting, Arthur. I want a divorce." The words hung in the suffocating air of the apartment. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Arthur looked down at the envelope. He didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and opened the clasp, pulling out the thick stack of legal documents. Petition for dissolution of marriage. For a long moment, silence reigned. Clara braced herself for the begging. She expected him to fall to his knees, to cry, to promise her he would change, that he would beg for a promotion at the delivery company. She had prepared a speech to shut him down. Instead, Arthur remained completely still. When he finally looked up, his eyes weren't filled with tears. They were impossibly dark, cold, and utterly terrifying. "Is there someone else?" Arthur asked quietly. Clara lifted her chin defiantly. "Julian Vance." Arthur's brow furrowed slightly. "The vice president at Apex Marketing? The guy who drives the leased Porsche and wears fake Rolexes?" Clara's face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare insult him. Julian is a real man. He's ambitious. He knows how to treat a woman. He's taking me to the Maldives next month. What were you going to give me, Arthur? A bus pass to the public beach?" "Julian Vance is a fragile man drowning in debt to keep up appearances," Arthur stated, his voice a chilling monotone. "But if that's the illusion you want to chase, I can't stop you." "Illusion?" Clara scoffed, stepping closer. "The only illusion was me thinking you would ever amount to anything. Julian can give me the life I deserve. A life of luxury, of respect. Things you couldn't give me if you lived 100 lifetimes." Arthur set the papers down on the counter. He took a slow, deep breath. 3 years ago, Arthur Pendelton had made a dangerous gamble. Heir to the multi-billion-dollar Pendelton Group, he was surrounded by sycophants, gold diggers, and corporate sharks. Exhausted by a world where his worth was measured entirely by his bank account, he had created a fake identity. He stripped himself of his wealth, rented this miserable apartment, and took a grueling, minimum-wage job. He wanted to find a woman who would love him for his mind, his heart, and his character, not his black card. When he met Clara, she was a struggling artist, sweet and seemingly unbothered by material things. He thought he had found his diamond in the rough. He had planned to reveal everything to her on their 3rd anniversary next month. He had already purchased a $50 million estate in the Hamptons as his wedding gift to her. But the pressure of poverty had slowly stripped away her sweet facade, revealing the greedy, deeply dissatisfied woman standing before him now. "Clara," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying an absolute, undeniable weight. He stepped toward her, and for the first time in their marriage, Clara felt a strange spark of intimidation. The tired delivery guy suddenly seemed to take up all the oxygen in the room. "I am going to ask you this once. And I want you to think very, very carefully before you answer." She swallowed hard but maintained her glare. "What? Are you absolutely certain this is what you want?" Arthur asked, his eyes locking onto hers, stripping her bare. "Are you willing to throw away the vows we made, the life we built, for Julian Vance and his money? If you walk out that door tonight, there is no coming back. No second chances. No forgiveness. I will be gone from your life forever." It was a final test. A plea disguised as an ultimatum. If she showed even a fraction of hesitation, if she remembered the nights they laughed until they cried, or the way he held her when she was sick, if she chose him over the money, he would tear up the papers and give her the world. Clara looked at him. She looked at his cheap uniform. She thought of Julian's penthouse and the gleaming credit cards in his wallet. She sneered. "Sign the damn papers, Arthur. And consider it the only decent thing you've ever done for me." The invisible thread connecting them snapped. Arthur's expression went completely blank. The delivery driver died in that exact moment, and the ruthless, calculating CEO of the Pendelton Empire resurrected. He didn't say another word. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a cheap plastic pen, and flipped to the last page of the document. With a few swift, sharp strokes, he signed his name. He pushed the papers across the counter toward her. "We're done," Arthur said. His voice was no longer that of a husband, it was the voice of a man dismissing an incompetent employee. "Get your things and get out." Clara snatched the papers, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face. "Julian has a car waiting downstairs. My bags are already packed." She dragged two expensive-looking suitcases from the bedroom, suitcases Julian had clearly bought for her. She paused at the door, looking back at Arthur one last time. "Goodbye, Arthur. Have a nice life delivering packages." The door slammed shut, leaving Arthur alone in the stifling, silent apartment. He stood there for a long moment. He didn't feel heartbroken. To his surprise, he only felt a profound, sweeping sense of relief. The heavy, suffocating charade was finally over. The poison had drawn itself out. Arthur walked over to the trash can and unceremoniously dumped the cheap diner food into it. Then, he reached beneath the collar of his uniform and pulled off the cheap, itchy fabric, tossing the orange shirt onto the floor. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black smartphone, a custom, encrypted device that no delivery driver could ever afford. He dialed a number he hadn't called in 3 years. It rang only once. "Sir." A crisp, professional British voice answered on the other end. "Harrison," Arthur said, his posture straightening, his shoulders rolling back as the mantle of immense power settled over him once again. "The social experiment is concluded." There was a brief pause on the line. "Understood, Mr. Pendelton. Shall I initiate the extraction protocol?" "Yes," Arthur replied, walking over to the dusty window and looking down at the street. He watched Clara load her bags into a waiting black sedan, laughing as Julian Vance leaned out to kiss her. Arthur felt absolutely nothing. "Send my personal driver to this address immediately." "Bring the Maybach," Arthur commanded, his eyes narrowing. "And Harrison?" "Yes, sir." "Contact the board of directors. Tell them my sabbatical is over. The king is returning to the Pendelton Group tomorrow morning." "It will be done, Mr. Pendelton." "Welcome back, sir." Arthur hung up the phone. He looked around the miserable, cramped apartment one last time, a cold, predatory smile playing on his lips. Clara wanted a world of money and power. Little did she know, she had just walked away from the man who owned it all. The Grand Astoria Hotel was a fortress of marble and gold, a monument to the kind of wealth that didn't just speak, but whispered seductively from behind velvet ropes. Tonight, it was the epicenter of the city's financial universe. The Pendelton Group, a conglomerate so vast it practically owned the city's skyline, was hosting its annual charity gala. But the real draw, the reason billionaires, politicians, and socialites had clawed their way onto the guest list, was the rumored return of the group's elusive CEO. He had been on a mysterious sabbatical for 3 years, and tonight marked his official return to the throne. Clara stepped out of the leased black Mercedes, the cool evening air kissing her bare shoulders. She wore a floor-length gown of emerald silk that clung to her curves, paired with a diamond collar necklace that caught the flash of the paparazzi's cameras. She felt like a queen. She felt like she had finally arrived. She looped her arm through Julian's. He looked undeniably handsome in a sharp, midnight blue tuxedo, his hair slicked back perfectly. He smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. This was the life Clara had traded her soul for, and as they walked up the crimson carpet, she told herself it was worth every ounce of guilt she had felt leaving Arthur in that miserable, squalid apartment 3 months ago. "Smile for the cameras, darling," Julian murmured, his hand tightening slightly on her waist. "We need to look like we belong here. Tonight is everything." "We do belong here, Julian," Clara purred, basking in the glow of the flashbulbs. Julian's smile was tight. What Clara didn't know, what she chose to ignore whenever Julian's credit cards were mysteriously declined due to bank errors, was that the emerald dress was rented. The diamond collar was on loan from a jeweler Julian was heavily in debt to. And Julian's marketing firm, Apex, was currently bleeding capital. He had spent his last dime securing an invitation to this gala. "Just remember the plan," Julian whispered harshly as they passed through the gilded doors and into the breathtaking ballroom. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the frescoed ceiling, casting a warm, glittering light over the sea of the city's elite. Waiters in white gloves glided through the crowd carrying silver trays of caviar and Dom Perignon. "I need 2 minutes with the Pendelton CEO. Just 2 minutes to pitch the Apex acquisition. If Pendelton backs us, my firm is saved. If not." He didn't finish the sentence, but the desperation in his eyes made Clara's stomach flutter with a brief, cold panic. She pushed the feeling down. Julian was a winner. He would figure it out. He always did. "You'll get your investment, Julian," she said, taking a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. She took a sip, letting the bubbles tickle her throat. "You're brilliant. Who wouldn't want to invest in you?" Julian puffed out his chest, his arrogance quickly returning to mask his insecurity. "Exactly. I just need to get in front of the man. Nobody even knows what the CEO looks like. He's a ghost. But tonight, he's stepping out of the shadows, and I'm going to be the first one to shake his hand." For the next 2 hours, Clara mingled in a haze of intoxicating luxury. She rubbed shoulders with women carrying handbags that cost more than Arthur had made in a year. She laughed at jokes she didn't understand and pretended to recognize politicians she had never seen before. Whenever a fleeting image of Arthur's tired face or his cheap, neon-orange delivery uniform crossed her mind, she banished it with another sip of champagne. That was my past, she thought fiercely. This is my future. Suddenly, the gentle hum of classical music from the string quartet faded. The thousands of conversations in the ballroom dwindled to a hushed, anticipatory murmur as the main stage lights dimmed. A single, brilliant spotlight pierced the darkness, illuminating a sleek mahogany podium at the center of the stage. Harrison, the Pendelton Group's legendary chief operating officer, a silver-haired, impeccably dressed British man who had been running the company in the CEO's absence, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests," Harrison's crisp voice echoed through the cavernous ballroom, commanding absolute silence. "For the past 3 years, the Pendelton Group has expanded into new global markets, revolutionized our tech sector, and spearheaded unprecedented philanthropic efforts. But we have done so without our visionary at the helm." Clara stood on her tiptoes, gripping Julian's arm. Julian was practically vibrating with nervous energy, his eyes locked on the stage like a starving man looking at a feast. "Our chief executive stepped away to undertake a personal journey," Harrison continued, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. "A journey to understand the foundation of our city, the lives of everyday people, and the true nature of loyalty and character. That journey has concluded. And so, it is my profound honor to reintroduce the chairman of the board, the majority shareholder, and the CEO of the Pendelton Group." The ballroom held its collective breath. "Please welcome," Harrison announced, his voice booming with absolute authority, "Mr. Arthur Pendelton." The crowd erupted into thunderous, polite applause. Clara clapped her hands, her eyes fixed eagerly on the dark curtain at the back of the stage. She wanted to see the face of the man who ruled the city. She wanted to see the billionaire who held Julian's and, by extension, her own future in his hands. The heavy velvet curtains parted. A man stepped out into the spotlight. He was tall, with broad shoulders that perfectly filled out a bespoke, charcoal gray Italian suit that cost more than most people's homes. A silver Patek Philippe watch glinted on his wrist. His dark hair, usually messy and hidden beneath a cheap baseball cap, was styled with effortless, razor-sharp precision. His posture was commanding, radiating a terrifying, absolute aura of power and supreme confidence. He walked to the podium with the slow, predatory grace of a king surveying his empire. Clara's heart stopped. The champagne flute slipped from her numb fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, violent crack, shattering into 100 glittering pieces, but she couldn't hear it over the sudden, roaring rush of blood in her ears. Her vision blurred, then snapped back into horrifying, crystal-clear focus. It was Arthur. Her Arthur. The delivery driver. The man who had cooked her instant noodles. The man whose worn-out boots she had kicked out of the way in their cramped hallway. The man she had served divorce papers to while he was still wearing a grease-stained uniform. Arthur Pendelton. No, Clara whispered. The word barely scraped its way out of her paralyzed throat. Her knees buckled slightly, and she had to grab Julian's arm to stop herself from collapsing into the spilled champagne at her feet. No, it's impossible. It can't be. Julian didn't notice her breakdown. His eyes were wide, his jaw slack as he stared at the stage. Good God, Julian muttered, wiping a sudden sheen of cold sweat from his forehead. He's so young. Look at him, Clara. That's him. That's the man who holds the keys to the kingdom. Julian, Clara choked out, the room spinning violently around her. The air was suddenly too thick to breathe. Julian, we have to leave. Now. Please. Leave? Are you insane? Julian hissed, shaking her hand off his arm without looking at her. He's about to speak. I need to figure out a way to intercept him when he steps off the stage. On the stage, Arthur adjusted the microphone. He didn't look down at notes. He didn't look nervous. He looked out over the sea of billionaires and politicians with a gaze of cold, indifferent calculation. 3 years ago, Arthur began, his voice deep, smooth, and commanding a far cry from the exhausted rumble Clara was used to. It echoed through the ballroom, carrying undeniable authority. I stepped away from this life because I realized that wealth creates a barrier. It breeds sycophants. It attracts people who love the gold, but despise the miner. Clara felt a physical blow to her chest. The words were a targeted strike, invisible to everyone in the room except her. I wanted to know, Arthur continued, his dark eyes slowly panning across the crowd, what it felt like to have nothing. To offer nothing but my own 2 hands, my hard work, and my devotion. I wanted to see who would stand by me in the dark, and who would run at the first sign of hardship. He paused. The ballroom was dead silent. Every single person was captivated by the billionaire's bizarre, gripping confession. Arthur's gaze swept over the VIP section near the front. It swept past mayors, past celebrities, past tech moguls. And then, his eyes locked directly onto Clara. From 50 feet away, through a crowd of hundreds, Arthur Pendelton found his ex-wife. Clara stopped breathing. She felt entirely exposed, stripped naked beneath the blinding weight of his stare. There was no love in his eyes. There was no anger. There was only a chilling, absolute emptiness. It was the look a man gives to a piece of trash on the sidewalk before stepping over it. Arthur held her gaze for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched upward into a microscopic, lethal smirk. I learned a great deal during my time away, Arthur said, finally breaking eye contact and addressing the room once more. I learned that loyalty is the most expensive commodity in the world. And I learned that cheap people cannot afford it. A murmur of appreciative laughter rippled through the crowd. Julian chuckled beside her, completely oblivious to the fact that the joke was a knife twisted directly into Clara's spine. So, to those who remain true, Arthur concluded, the Pendelton Group is ready to build the future with you. And to those who revealed their true colors. His voice dropped to a quiet, dangerous timbre. Consider your accounts closed. The crowd erupted into a standing ovation. Julian was clapping furiously, a manic grin on his face. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, he muttered. I have to get to him. Julian, Stop. Clara grabbed his tuxedo jacket, her manicured nails digging into the expensive fabric. Tears of sheer, unadulterated terror were welling in her eyes. You don't understand. We can't talk to him. Julian finally looked at her, his expression twisting from excitement to deep annoyance. He looked at her pale face, her trembling lips, and the shattered glass on the floor. What is wrong with you? Julian snapped, his voice a harsh, ugly whisper. You're embarrassing me. Pull yourself together, Clara. This is my one shot. You don't get it? Clara sobbed quietly, the devastating reality crashing down on her in a tidal wave of regret and horror. She pointed a trembling finger toward the stage, where a swarm of security guards was now forming a protective ring around Arthur as he stepped down to mingle. That's him, Clara choked, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Who? Julian demanded, looking wildly from her to the stage. Arthur. Clara's voice broke into a pathetic whimper. My ex-husband. The delivery driver. Julian, that's Arthur. Julian froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His eyes slowly darted back to the billionaire surrounded by bodyguards, then back to the crying woman clinging to his arm. The gears in his head turned, grinding together as the catastrophic truth set in. The man he needed to save his company was the man whose wife he had stolen. Across the room, through a gap in the crowd, Arthur paused. He was holding a fresh glass of champagne. He looked directly at Julian and Clara. Arthur raised his glass toward them in a silent, mocking toast, took a sip, and then turned his back, vanishing into the sea of power and wealth that Clara could never, ever touch again. The morning sun clawed its way through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Julian Vance's luxury penthouse, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported hardwood floors. It was a beautiful, crisp Saturday morning in the city, but inside the apartment, the air was thick, suffocating, and thoroughly poisoned. Clara sat on the edge of the sprawling king-sized bed, clutching the lapels of her silk robe so tightly her knuckles were stark white. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of Arthur draped in bespoke Italian wool, radiating the kind of absolute, terrifying power that could crush a man with a single word burned itself into the back of her eyelids. He had raised his glass to her. A silent, mocking toast to her unparalleled stupidity. In the living room, Julian was pacing like a caged, rabid animal. He was still wearing his tuxedo trousers and the wrinkled white dress shirt from the gala, though the bow tie was long gone, discarded somewhere near the marble kitchen island. The charming, wealthy gentleman facade that Clara had fallen so desperately in love with had completely evaporated, replaced by a frantic, sweating man teetering on the edge of total ruin. What do you mean, frozen? Julian screamed into his sleek smartphone, his voice cracking with hysteria. He dragged a trembling hand through his slicked back hair, ruining the perfect styling. You can't freeze the corporate accounts without a warrant. I have payroll on Monday. I have hello? Hello. He pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen in pure disbelief before hurling it across the room. It shattered against the custom-built mahogany bookshelf, raining glass onto the expensive Persian rug. Clara flinched, pulling her knees to her chest. Julian. She whispered, her voice trembling. Julian spun around, his eyes locking onto her. There was no love in his gaze. There wasn't even the possessive lust he usually looked at her with. There was only pure, unadulterated hatred. Don't speak, Julian hissed, marching toward the bedroom doorway. His chest heaved as he pointed a shaking finger at her. Do not open your mouth. Do you have any idea what is happening right now? Do you have the slightest comprehension of what you have done? Clara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Julian, I didn't know. I swear to God, I had no idea he was Arthur Pendelton. He delivered packages. He came home smelling like exhaust and cheap diner food. He owns the city. Julian roared, the veins bulging in his neck. He grabbed a heavy crystal scotch tumbler from the nightstand and smashed it into the wall just inches from Clara's head. She screamed, throwing her hands up to protect her face as shards of glass rained down onto the mattress. He owns the banks, Clara. Julian continued, his voice dropping into a ragged, terrifying sneer. He owns the logistics companies my firm relies on. He owns the commercial real estate board that leases this very building. I just got off the phone with my CFO. In the span of 8 hours, every single client we share indirect ties with through the Pendelton Group has terminated their contracts. My credit lines have been entirely revoked. I am being audited by 3 different regulatory agencies at the exact same time. Clara stared at him, paralyzed by terror. The sheer scale of Arthur's retaliation was incomprehensible. Arthur hadn't yelled. He hadn't thrown a punch. He had simply made a few phone calls from the back of his Maybach, and Julian's entire empire was being systematically vaporized. We can fix this," Clara stammered, tears spilling down her cheeks, ruining her expensive skincare routine. "You're smart, Julian. You can rebuild. We can start over." Julian stopped pacing. He looked at her, and then, he began to laugh. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was a harsh, ugly, grating sound that echoed off the high ceilings of the penthouse. "We." Julian mocked, his lip curling in disgust. He walked slowly toward the bed, looming over her. "There is no we, Clara. You were a trophy. You were a pretty little accessory I picked up because you looked good on my arm and you made me feel superior. But trophies are supposed to sit on the shelf and look shiny. They aren't supposed to carry a curse that destroys my entire life." The words hit Clara like a physical blow to the stomach. "Julian, you said you loved me. You said I deserved better than a broke loser. I said whatever I needed to say to get you into my bed." Julian snapped, all remnants of his polished charm stripped away, revealing the rotten core beneath. "And clearly, it didn't take much. You are nothing but a cheap, opportunistic gold digger. And the most pathetic part? You couldn't even dig in the right place. You had a billionaire, a literal king, eating out of the palm of your hand, and you threw him away for a leased Porsche and a few shopping sprees." He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising and vicious, and yanked her off the bed. Clara stumbled, her bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. "Get your things," Julian ordered, his voice dripping with venom. "Get out of my sight. Get out of my apartment. Julian, please." Clara sobbed, trying to pull her arm away. "I have nowhere to go. I gave up my apartment. I gave up everything to be with you." "Not my problem," Julian sneered. He dragged her out into the living room and roughly shoved her toward the front door. "But before you go, you're going to leave everything I paid for. The emerald dress. The diamond earrings. The designer bags. All of it. You can't do this." Clara cried, pure panic setting in. "I'm your fiancé." "You're a liability," Julian corrected coldly. He walked over to the closet by the door, yanked it open, and pulled out the 2 battered suitcases Clara had brought with her from Arthur's apartment 3 months ago. He threw them violently at her feet. "Pack whatever cheap rags you brought with you. Leave the credit cards on the counter. You have 5 minutes before I call building security and have you physically thrown onto the street." For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. The room spun. She looked at Julian, seeing the ugly, cruel lines of his face, the absolute lack of empathy in his eyes. He wasn't a savior. He was a monster wearing an expensive suit. Numbly, mechanically, Clara crawled on the floor, opening the cheap suitcases. With trembling hands, she packed her old, worn-out sweaters. Her generic brand makeup. The few pairs of non-designer shoes she still owned. She stripped off the silk robe, leaving it in a puddle on the floor, and put on the simple jeans and cotton t-shirt she had worn the day she served Arthur the divorce papers. She walked to the kitchen island and placed the gleaming platinum credit cards onto the marble surface. They clinked softly. The sound was a death knell to her dreams of luxury. Julian stood by the door, his arms crossed, watching her with a look of utter repulsion. He didn't say a single word as she dragged her suitcases past him. As Clara stepped out into the lavish, carpeted hallway, Julian looked her up and down one last time. "Good luck, Clara. I hope the pavement is comfortable." The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, the metallic click of the deadbolt echoing with finality. Clara stood alone in the hallway, the silence pressing in on her ears. She slowly made her way to the elevator, avoiding the gaze of her own reflection in the polished brass doors. When she reached the lobby, the doorman who had spent the last 3 months greeting her with a cheerful "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," now looked pointedly down at his desk, pretending she didn't exist. News traveled fast in buildings like this. She pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors and stepped out into the city. The morning air, which had seemed so beautiful from behind the penthouse windows, was actually biting and cold. A brisk wind whipped down the concrete canyon of the avenue, slicing through her thin cotton t-shirt. Clara walked for 3 blocks, dragging the heavy suitcases behind her, until her legs simply gave out. She collapsed onto a wooden bench at a bus stop, pulling her knees to her chest as the bustling city moved around her, entirely indifferent to her profound, catastrophic ruin. She sat there for hours. The sun moved across the sky, casting long, gloomy shadows over the pavement. A light drizzle began to fall, dampening her hair and mixing with the dried tears on her face. She looked down at her hands. They were empty. No diamonds. No platinum cards. Nothing. And then, the memories began to flood in. Unbidden, unstoppable, and agonizingly clear. She remembered a cold winter night 2 years ago. The heater in their run-down apartment had broken. Arthur had wrapped her in every blanket they owned. He had spent his last $10 to buy her a cup of hot cocoa from the corner bodega, and he had sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her freezing feet until she fell asleep. She remembered the way he looked at her. Not as an accessory. Not as a trophy. But as if she hung the moon and the stars. Arthur had nothing, Clara realized, a choked, agonizing sob tearing its way out of her throat. He pretended to have nothing. But he gave me 100% of everything he had. He cooked for me. He protected me. He respected me. Julian had millions. But he only ever gave her a fraction of a percent of his wealth, with conditions attached to every single penny. And the second she became an inconvenience, he discarded her like a piece of rotting garbage. The weight of her realization was a physical, crushing force. She had been so blinded by the shiny veneer of wealth that she had completely ignored the character of the men offering it. She had thrown away a man made of solid, unbreakable gold for a man made of cheap, painted plastic. "Arthur," Clara whispered to the empty street, her voice breaking. "Oh God, Arthur. What did I do?" She had to fix this. She had to make him understand. She had to grovel, to beg, to crawl on her hands and knees if necessary. He had loved her once. Deep down, beneath the expensive suits and the terrifying CEO persona, the man who had bought her sesame chicken and rubbed her feet had to still be in there. He had to be. Clara stood up, her jaw setting with a desperate, pathetic resolve. She abandoned one of her heavy suitcases by the bench, taking only the smaller one. She looked up at the towering skyscrapers in the distance, locating the tallest, most imposing structure of glass and steel piercing the clouds. The Pendelton Group headquarters. She began to walk toward it in the rain. She was going to get her husband back, or she was going to die trying. The rain was no longer a light, melancholic drizzle, it had evolved into a violent, freezing downpour that lashed against the concrete spine of the city. Clara dragged her single, battered suitcase through the flooded streets, the cheap wheels grinding and squeaking in protest. Her sneakers were soaked through, her thin cotton t-shirt plastered to her shivering skin. She looked like a ghost of the glamorous woman who had attended the gala just 12 hours prior. Ahead of her, piercing the bruised gray sky, stood the Pendelton Group headquarters. It was a monolith of black glass and brushed steel, an architectural marvel that dominated the financial district. It looked less like an office building and more like a fortress. As Clara approached the sprawling plaza leading to the entrance, the sheer scale of the structure made her feel insignificantly small. This was the empire Arthur had built. This was the kingdom he had abandoned to live in a squalid, roach-infested apartment just to see if she had a heart. And she had failed the test spectacularly. Clara pushed through the massive revolving doors, stumbling into the cavernous lobby. The contrast was jarring. Inside, the air was perfectly climate-controlled, smelling faintly of expensive cedar and polished marble. Business executives in $1,000 suits moved with quiet purpose, their footsteps muffled by thick, sound-absorbing architecture. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as she caught sight of herself in a mirrored pillar. Her hair was plastered to her skull in wet, ratty strands. Her mascara had run down her cheeks, leaving dark, hollow circles under her eyes. She looked unhinged. Desperate. "Ma'am." A stern voice snapped her out of her horrified trance. Two security guards, dressed in immaculate black suits with earpieces, were approaching her. Their expressions were a mix of professional caution and outright disdain. She was a wet, shivering mess tracking muddy water across their pristine imported marble floors. "Can we help you find your way out, ma'am?" "This is a private corporate building," the taller guard said, moving to block her path to the elevators. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. I need to see him. I need to see the CEO. Arthur Pendelton." The guards exchanged a dry, amused glance. "Do you have an appointment?" the second guard asked, his tone dripping with patronizing patience. "Mr. Pendleton's schedule is booked for the next 6 months. If you'd like to leave a message with the front desk." "I don't need an appointment." Clara suddenly shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the quiet lobby. A few executives paused to stare. Panic and adrenaline surged through her veins. "I am his wife. I am Clara Pendleton. Look it up. The divorce hasn't been finalized yet. Legally, I am still his wife, and you cannot keep me out of this building." The guards stiffened, their hands drifting toward their radios. The taller one narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice and step toward the exit, or we will have you removed by force. Call him." Clara sobbed, dropping to her knees right there in the lobby, her suitcase falling over with a loud smack. "Just call him. Tell him Clara is here. Please. Tell him I'm sorry." The taller guard sighed and lifted his wrist to speak into his comms device. "Control, we have a code 4 in the main lobby. Emotionally disturbed individual claiming to be the CEO's wife. Requesting escort to remove her from the premises." Clara buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. It was over. She couldn't even get past the front door. She was going to be thrown out onto the street like trash. Suddenly, a smooth, crisp British voice sliced through the tension in the lobby. "Stand down, gentlemen." Clara looked up through her wet, tangled hair. Standing behind the security desk was Harrison, the silver-haired chief operating officer who had introduced Arthur at the gala. He adjusted his tailored cuffs, his expression completely unreadable as he looked down at the pathetic, dripping woman on the floor. "Mr. Harrison, sir," the guard said, immediately stepping back. "She's causing a disturbance. She claims." "I am aware of who she is," Harrison interrupted softly. His icy blue eyes pinned Clara to the floor. Mr. Pendelton was informed of her arrival the moment she stepped onto the plaza. He has authorized her ascent. The guards looked shocked but nodded instantly, stepping aside. Harrison gestured elegantly toward a sleek, unmarked elevator tucked away in a private alcove. The private lift, Mrs. Pendelton. It will take you directly to the top floor. He is expecting you. Clara scrambled to her feet, abandoning her suitcase on the marble floor. She didn't care about her clothes anymore. She rushed past Harrison, murmuring a breathless, hysterical thank you, and threw herself into the elevator. There were no buttons inside. The doors slid shut silently, and the elevator shot upward with a stomach-dropping speed. Clara pressed her hands against the cool glass walls of the cab, trying to control her hyperventilating. He agreed to see me, she thought, a wild, delusional spark of hope igniting in her chest. He could have turned me away. He could have let them throw me out. But he didn't. He still cares. He just wants to see me grovel. I can do that. I'll apologize. I'll tell him I was confused, that Julian brainwashed me. Ding. The doors parted. Clara stepped out of the elevator and into another world. The penthouse office was massive, larger than the entire floor plan of the apartment building they used to live in. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying, 360-degree view of the city, the rain lashing against the reinforced glass. The decor was aggressively modern and intimidating: dark mahogany, black leather, and brushed steel. At the far end of the room, sitting behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single slab of obsidian, was Arthur. He was reading a digital tablet, holding a silver pen in his right hand. He was wearing a stark white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exposing the strong forearms she used to trace with her fingers when they lay in bed together. He didn't look up when the elevator doors opened. He simply kept reading, completely absorbed in his work, as if a billion-dollar merger was infinitely more important than the woman standing in his office. "Arthur," Clara whispered. Her voice sounded pitifully weak in the massive space. He didn't answer. He swiped to the next page on his tablet, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. Clara took a step forward, leaving a wet footprint on the plush, charcoal carpet. "Arthur, please. Please look at me." Arthur slowly set the pen down. He locked the tablet and pushed it aside. Finally, he lifted his head. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and Clara felt the last remnants of her delusional hope turn to ash. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no sadness, no lingering affection, no triumph. There was only a cold, clinical indifference. He looked at her the way a scientist might look at a particularly uninteresting insect under a microscope. "You are tracking rainwater onto a rug that costs more than Julian Vance's entire net worth," Arthur said softly. His voice was smooth, deep, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Make this brief, Clara. I have a board meeting in 7 minutes." The coldness of his tone shattered her. Clara ran across the room and threw herself against his desk, dropping to her knees. Her wet hands gripped the edge of the obsidian slab. "Arthur, I am so sorry," she wailed, her chest heaving with violent, ugly sobs. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. Julian tricked me. He manipulated me into thinking I needed a different life. But it was all a lie. I don't want the money, Arthur. I swear to God, I don't care about any of this." She gestured wildly to the massive office. "I want the man who brought me sesame chicken when I was tired. I want the man who held me when the heater broke. I love you, Arthur. I love the delivery driver. Please, please forgive me. I'll do anything. I'll sign a prenup. I won't touch a single penny of your money. Just let me come home." She bowed her head, weeping bitterly, waiting for the feeling of his hand on her hair. Waiting for him to sigh, to step around the desk, and to pull her into his arms. The silence stretched on for 10 agonizing seconds. Only the sound of the rain beating against the glass filled the room. Then, Arthur let out a short, quiet breath. It sounded like a chuckle, but there was zero humor in it. "A brilliant performance," Arthur murmured. "Truly, Clara, if I didn't know you down to the marrow of your bones, I might actually believe you." Clara looked up, her face streaked with tears and mascara. "I'm not lying. I love you." Arthur leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers together. "You love the delivery driver," he repeated, tasting the words as if they were poisonous. "You love the man who brought you cheap takeout. That is a fascinating revision of history, Clara. Because as I recall, less than 24 hours ago, you looked that exact man in the eyes and told him he was a glorified errand boy. You told him he was a pathetic failure who could never give you the life you deserved." "I was angry," Clara pleaded, crawling slightly closer. "We were poor, and I was just so tired of struggling." "We were never poor," Arthur interrupted, his voice finally cracking like a whip, sharp and lethal. "You just lacked patience. You lacked loyalty. You wanted the finish line without running the race. You didn't leave me because you stopped loving me. You left me because you loved money more." Clara shook her head violently. "No. Julian meant nothing to me. Julian Vance," Arthur interrupted again, reaching into the top drawer of his desk. He pulled out a thick manila folder ironically, looking exactly like the envelope that had contained their divorce papers. He tossed it onto the desk. It slid across the smooth obsidian surface and stopped right in front of Clara's face. "Let's talk about the man you threw our marriage away for." Clara stared at the folder, her stomach turning. "What is that?" "Open it," Arthur commanded. With trembling fingers, Clara flipped the cover open. Inside was a stack of high-resolution 8x10 photographs. She stared at the first picture. It was a photo of Julian, taken through the window of an expensive restaurant. He was holding hands across the table with a stunning, blonde woman. Clara's breath hitched. She flipped to the next photo. It was Julian and the blonde woman walking into a hotel. She flipped again. This photo was taken inside Julian's penthouse, the very apartment she had just been kicked out of. Julian and the blonde woman were intertwined on the sofa, a bottle of champagne on the table. The timestamp on the bottom corner of the photo indicated it was taken 2 weeks ago. While Clara had been sitting in the penthouse, dreaming of her new life of luxury, Julian had been bringing another woman into their bed the second she left to go shopping. "His name is Julian Vance, but his real passion is evidently diversification," Arthur said dryly, watching the horror wash over Clara's face. "The woman is the daughter of a prominent venture capitalist. Julian has been courting her for 6 months, hoping her father would bail out his failing marketing firm. You, Clara, were never his fiancée. You were a temporary distraction. A shiny toy he stole from another man to stroke his own fragile ego." Clara dropped the photos. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely feel her fingertips. The betrayal stacked upon the betrayal was too much to process. She had ruined her entire life, destroyed a true, pure love, for a man who viewed her as a disposable joke. "Why?" Clara choked out, the tears freezing on her face. "Why are you showing me this?" Arthur stood up from his chair. He walked around the desk, his imposing figure towering over her kneeling form. Clara looked up at him, her eyes wide with absolute, crushing despair. "Because I want you to understand exactly what you traded me for," Arthur said softly, looking down at her. "You wanted a man of ambition, Clara. You wanted a man of wealth. And you found one who used you, cheated on you, and threw you onto the street the second you became a liability." He knelt down on one knee, bringing his face level with hers. For a split second, Clara saw the man she married. But the eyes were the eyes of a ruthless king. I offered you a kingdom, Clara, Arthur whispered, his voice dangerously quiet. I had a $50 million estate in the Hamptons waiting for you as an anniversary gift. I was prepared to give you the world. All you had to do was hold my hand in the dark for a little while longer. But you couldn't do it. Clara let out a gut-wrenching wail, throwing her arms out to hug his waist. Arthur, please. Please, I'm begging you. I'll die out there. Please give me another chance. Arthur caught her wrists effortlessly before she could touch him. His grip was iron-tight, pulling her hands away from his body. He stood back up, straightening his cuffs, dismissing her entirely. The delivery guy you loved is dead, Clara, Arthur said, turning his back to her and walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows to look out over his city. You killed him when you signed those papers. And unfortunately for you, Arthur Pendleton's wealth is the one thing you will never, ever have access to. He didn't turn around when he gave his final order. Harrison. The doors to the office opened instantly. The coup stood there, flanked by two massive security guards. Sir? Harrison asked. The trash was left in my office, Arthur said, his reflection in the glass completely devoid of mercy. Please have it removed. No. Arthur. No. Clara screamed, fighting frantically as the two guards grabbed her by her arms, lifting her completely off her feet. She kicked, she thrashed, but she was entirely powerless against them. Arthur, look at me. Look at me. Please. Arthur didn't look. He stood like a statue, watching the storm rage outside, entirely untouched by the hysteria behind him. The guards dragged Clara backward toward the elevators. Her screams echoed through the immaculate penthouse, bouncing off the mahogany walls and the obsidian desk, a haunting soundtrack to the end of her life. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off her cries entirely, leaving the office in total, peaceful silence once more. Arthur took a deep breath, adjusted his tie, and checked his watch. He had a board meeting in 2 minutes. The past was finally, permanently buried. The descent from the top of the world took exactly 42 seconds. Inside the private, soundproof elevator of the Pendelton Group headquarters, Clara's screams bounced off the polished mahogany panels, creating a chaotic, suffocating cacophony. She kicked, she thrashed, and she clawed wildly at the two massive security guards holding her by her arms, but her efforts were as useless as a moth battering itself against a window pane. The guards didn't even flinch. They held her with the practiced, terrifying ease of men who disposed of much more dangerous threats on a daily basis. Let me go. Clara shrieked, her vocal cords shredding from the force of her hysteria. Take me back up. Arthur. You can't do this to me. I am your wife. The digital floor indicator above the door ticked downward in a merciless, glowing red countdown. 90-75. 50-20. With every number that flashed, the reality of her situation sank its icy claws deeper into her chest. She wasn't going back up. The billionaire CEO wasn't going to chase after her. The fairytale was dead, and she was the one who had poisoned it. Ding. The elevator doors slid open to the expansive, marble-floored lobby. The pristine silence of the corporate floor was instantly shattered by Clara's sobbing. Dozens of high-powered executives, visiting dignitaries, and sleek corporate assistants stopped in their tracks, turning to stare at the spectacle. Clara's face burned with a fiery, agonizing humiliation. These were the people she had desperately wanted to be peers with. She had dreamed of walking through this very lobby dripping in diamonds, commanding respect as the CEO's wife. Instead, she was being paraded through it like a captured animal, her clothes soaking wet, her hair a tangled, frizzy rat's nest, and her face smeared with black streaks of ruined mascara. Keep moving, the taller guard muttered, his voice devoid of any pity. They dragged her past the front desk, past the murmuring crowd, and toward the colossal revolving glass doors. As they neared the exit, Harrison stepped out from behind a sleek granite pillar. The chief operating officer held a single, battered suitcase in his gloved hand, the one Clara had abandoned in her frantic rush to the penthouse. "Your luggage, Mrs. Pendelton," Harrison said smoothly, dropping it at her feet. The cheap plastic wheels clattered loudly against the floor. "Mr. Pendelton's legal team will contact you regarding the finalization of the divorce. I strongly advise you not to return to this property. Next time, the police will be involved." "Harrison, please," Clara begged, her voice reducing to a pathetic, wet wheeze. She reached out toward him. "Tell him I'm sorry. Just tell him I'm sorry." Harrison looked at her with eyes as cold and unforgiving as a winter sea. "You are not sorry for what you did, Clara. You are only sorry for what you lost. Good day." He nodded to the guards. They pushed through the side exit door and unceremoniously shoved Clara out into the freezing storm. Clara stumbled on the wet concrete, her hands scraping against the rough pavement to break her fall. The heavy glass door slammed shut behind her, the magnetic lock engaging with a heavy, final click. She was locked out. The fortress was sealed. The rain hit her immediately, a relentless, freezing downpour that soaked through her thin cotton t-shirt in seconds. She knelt there on the plaza, the frigid water mixing with her hot tears, staring blindly at the dark puddles pooling around her bleeding palms. She had absolutely nothing. Julian had kicked her out and frozen her out of his life. Arthur had banished her from his empire. She had no money, no phone charger, no credit cards, and nowhere to go. She was entirely, utterly alone in a city of 8 million people. A low, mechanical rumble vibrated through the concrete beneath her knees. Clara slowly lifted her head. 50 yards away, at the side of the monolithic Pendelton building, a massive, reinforced steel garage door was slowly rising. A fleet of sleek, blacked-out SUVs rolled out into the rain, their headlights cutting through the gloomy afternoon like predatory eyes. They moved in perfect, synchronized formation, securing the exit route. And then, emerging from the center of the motorcade, came a vehicle that radiated pure, unadulterated wealth. It was a custom, jet-black Mercedes Maybach. The car was a fortress on wheels, gleaming under the streetlights, utterly impervious to the storm raging outside. It rolled to a gentle stop at the edge of the plaza, waiting for the security detail to block the oncoming city traffic. Clara forced herself up, her soaked sneakers slipping on the pavement. She grabbed the handle of her broken suitcase and dragged it toward the street edge, her eyes glued to the tinted windows of the Maybach. The car was idling just 10 feet away from her. Through the heavily tinted glass, the interior lights were dimly illuminated. Clara saw him. Arthur was sitting in the back seat, leaning against the plush cream leather. He had taken off his suit jacket, and he looked incredibly relaxed, his broad shoulders resting comfortably. The terrifying, intimidating aura of the CEO had vanished, replaced by a soft, genuine warmth she hadn't seen since the days they lived in their tiny apartment. But that warmth wasn't directed at her. Sitting beside Arthur was a woman. She wasn't wearing an emerald silk gown, and she didn't have millions of dollars of rented diamonds wrapped around her neck. She was dressed simply, in an elegant, tailored beige trench coat and a soft cashmere scarf. Her hair was pulled back neatly, framing a face that radiated quiet intelligence and profound kindness. Clara recognized her instantly. It was Maya. A memory hit Clara with the force of a freight train. 6 months ago, Arthur had come home from a delivery shift completely soaked from a thunderstorm, just like this one. He had told Clara a story about a receptionist at a small downtown clinic who had seen him shivering outside. The woman had brought him inside, made him a cup of hot tea, and given him her own umbrella to make sure he could finish his route safely. She hadn't known he was a billionaire. She had just seen a human being who was cold and tired, and she had treated him with profound dignity. Arthur was looking at Maya now, his dark eyes filled with absolute adoration. Maya was holding a tablet, pointing to something on the screen and laughing. Arthur smiled a massive, bright, unburdened smile and reached out, gently tucking a stray lock of hair behind Maya's ear. His hand lingered on her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin with a tenderness that made Clara's heart violently shatter into a million irreparable pieces. This was the love Clara had thrown away. This was the devotion she had traded for Julian's cheap, toxic illusion. Arthur hadn't needed a supermodel or a high society heiress. He had just needed someone with a good heart. He had found his queen, and he was going to give her the world. The traffic light turned green. As the Maybach began to pull away, Arthur turned his head. His eyes met Clara's through the rain-streaked glass. Clara stood on the sidewalk, shivering violently, her clothes ruined, holding a broken suitcase. She opened her mouth, mouthing the word please. Arthur didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He didn't even look angry. For one fleeting second, he just looked at her with a profound, quiet pity. Then, the tinted window slowly rolled up, cutting her off completely. He turned his attention back to Maya, taking her hand in his, and the Maybach accelerated smoothly down the avenue, disappearing into the sea of city traffic, flanked by its security escort. They were gone. Clara collapsed onto the wet bus stop bench, burying her face in her cold, numb hands. The roaring sound of the city traffic felt like a mocking laugh ringing in her ears. Slowly, the gloom of the storm was pierced by a massive, blinding white light from above. Clara looked up. Towering over the intersection, spanning the entire side of a skyscraper, a massive digital billboard had just flickered to life. It was a high-resolution portrait of Arthur Pendelton. He looked commanding, brilliant, and untouchable, wearing his bespoke suit, looking out over the city he owned. Beneath his imposing figure, the bold, glowing letters of the Pendelton Group logo lit up the rainy street. Building the future on a foundation of loyalty. Clara stared at the billboard as the freezing rain soaked her to the bone. She was a ghost now, a forgotten footnote in the life of a king. She had spent her entire life chasing the illusion of wealth, completely blind to the fact that she had been holding the greatest treasure in the world all along. She pulled her knees to her chest, shivering violently under the glowing, unblinking eyes of the billionaire she used to call her husband, and wept until she had no tears left to shed.